Welcome, everybody. I am going to stop sharing that reel of images. And I am so excited for this evening to come. Any of you that are on that don't know me, my name is Sabynthe Jones. And I have just been looking forward to sharing this conversation with Rosemary, really sharing Rosemary with you and her art that has inspired me so much. Our producer is Angela. Thank you, Angela. And she has muted everybody, so we invite you to use the chat box to send us questions. And then if I see the questions, that's great. If I don't, Angela will help me get those questions asked of Rosemary. So my inspiration for this evening and to request an interview with Rosemary Leach originated after watching an interview several weeks ago where an Ottawa Valley Writers Group interviewed her. And it was wonderful, and you can watch it later. It's on her website if you'd like to. That was the inspiration. So I said, I have so many more questions, Rosemary. Can I host my own interview with you? So she was sweet. She said, of course. So Rosemary has been a self-supporting visual artist practicing in the Ottawa Valley for over 2 decades. In addition to exhibiting in solo and juried exhibitions, she's participated in studio tours from her home in Almont, which is just outside of Ottawa. Rosemary has taught for several schools and municipalities, and until recently offered small group painting workshops and retreats. She's a published writer, has illustrated a children's book, and has even designed the annual t-shirt for a long-standing music festival, Blue Skies. She's frequently sought after by arts groups to speak on the subject of creativity. Rosemary's paintings are featured in private collections across Canada and USA, as well as in Denmark, France, and the UK. Said about her art, as per her website, Rosemary Leach's paintings explore the rich character of familiar objects. She responds to the contemporary cool aesthetic with a focus on what is warm, personal, and evokes a story. A milk carton strapped to an old bicycle, espresso on a messy countertop. Her compositions honor a contemplative approach to everyday life and a celebration of lives deeply lived. Welcome, Rosemary.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for coming. And thank you, Sabynthe, for thinking of this. It's really fun because when I met Sabynthe, she was doing a master's degree and she was an anthropologist. I don't think I knew what an anthropologist was, but we were both askers of questions, that's for sure.
So when I was looking through your resume, your website, there's something I didn't understand in all the different
as an interviewer, you know, for
the section, email these stories to me, Rosemary. What is that about?
I write a blog, and my writing and my paintings kind of are a nice match for each other. So essentially, the way my business works now is that I finish a group of paintings and I write whatever I'm thinking about, which is they're usually around 700 words. They're not long pieces. And then I will sort of package this together in an email and send it out to my people. And so, yeah, they're reflective pieces and I think carry a similar energy to the paintings.
Okay, so they're your writings. Okay, that explains that. I was thinking you're soliciting our stories to inspire you to paint. So I wanted I thought that would be lovely too. So this is really what I really wanted to ask you. That would be the theme for this evening, really. And that is, when in your life did you know you were meant to be a painter, a visual artist? And what was your journey to get there?
See, that's the question my parents should have asked me. When did you know? Yeah, I have really painted and drawn almost compulsively all my life. And so in a way, it's almost like when I think about, my teenage years, my siblings had moved out and I had turned my brother's bedroom into a studio without knowing what a studio was, so I just was constantly, all through my academic undergrad, I was, painting and drawing on the sly, and I I would go around and do drawings of people's houses and then knock on their door and say, do you want this for $25? And so it's almost been more of a question of like a slow acknowledgement of like, my life is going to be really unhappy if I don't do this. So, and that was a painful process. That wasn't an easy thing for me. Like I came from a very conventional North Toronto family. My dad worked on Bay Street. My mom was a stay-at-home mom who was very, it was a totally patriarchal, traditional household. And I had 0 minutes of conversation with my parents about what do you want to do with your life, like 0, which, for those of you who have kids now, well, for us, it was like a constant conversation of like, do you want to wear the red pajamas? Do you want to wear the blue pajamas? Do you like cooking more than you like writing? That conversation of what do you love to do has been very much a part of our household. So, so it was just, when I was at university, I was doing an English degree and literally walking past the art building every day. And it just seemed impossible. Like, I was like, well, you can get in there if you have a portfolio, but how does a person get a portfolio, not even knowing that I had a portfolio? So, someone had said to me, well, do your academic degree, and then if you still need to do the art thing, then, you can go back to it. So I tried to be someone else for a couple of years. And so in my undergrad, I tried to squish in as many art courses as they would let me take. I became a high school teacher, and Jake got a job up in Wyerton, and I said to him, well, it's the job or me. And he said, well, I've got school debt, so I'm going to take the job. And so I made a lot of kids miserable by teaching high school for a couple of years, and then finally went to Sheridan College because I sort of thought, well, like literally the question of, do I want to be an artist was too overwhelming for me. It was sort of like, well, what can I do that won't make me miserable? And so I was like, okay, well, I'll be a potter. Like, that's more practical. And so I became a potter, and I turned every pot into a painting. Like, I was so then finally, I guess it was when I was 30 years old, and I'd been doing pottery and painting, and I'd spent a couple of years at Sheridan. Also, I had my undergrad degree had had a feminist leaning to it. And I had a feeling of like, oh, I want to know how to paint. I don't want to have a discussion about feminism. So I really was pulling away from any aspect of the art world that felt more theoretical. And so, yeah, when I was 30 and I would do a pottery show and then have paintings on the side, and people would go like, your pottery's nice, but your paintings really speak to me. And I'd be like, oh, you're not allowed to say that. And then pottery, for those of you who are familiar with pottery, it's like you're hauling around 50-pound bags of clay and chemicals. And at that point, I had 2 very small people in diapers, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to paint for a while. So that was really when I dropped everything else. So that was 23 years ago, something like that.
So you mentioned Jake, and Jake, who chose paying off student debt over you, is actually your current life partner.
But I think that was my last ultimatum. I didn't do that again.
So he's your current life partner, and you both have 2 children together. And one of the questions I had was, for those of you who don't know, Jake is a science writer, and he's also written and performed plays. So the science and the artistic coming together, also self-supporting in these creative endeavors. And you met Jake in university. And that's early to have established a criteria to choose a life partner that would engage in the lifestyle of you each doing what you're meant to do in a self-employed manner. So how did you manage that?
Well, again, it's a little bit as much about what you don't want as what you do want. So I met Jake at Teachers College, and Jake, so neither of us were identifying as like creatives, or like it was very much like a like doing it on the sly, doing it a lot, but I mean, but not wanting to say, hey, this is what I'm going to do with my life. So we were both like, okay, don't know what else to do, teach high school kind of mode. And then, but when I met Jake, he was in therapy and he was keeping a journal. So that to me seemed fairly auspicious. I was like, okay, this is a guy who's tuning into his inner channel. And I think that for over the course of the next few years, when we were both teaching high school and like really unhappy, and then I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to art school. And I think that in a lot of ways we have kind of riffed off each other, in terms of like, Jake's been really courageous about things that I would not have been courageous about. Like, for instance, when I was pregnant with our second child and I had Max in diapers, Jake phoned me from the Museum of Nature. So he had shifted at that point to, from like an outdoor ed guy to a museum interpreter, but still a person with a grown-up job. And he said, oh, they've just offered me the exact job that I want. And I'm like, that's awesome. And he's like, I can't go to another cookie meeting. Like, I can't do this. And I'm like, well, you know, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, I can't have this conversation with you. It was the only time he's ever hung up on me. So when I was pregnant with Frankie, he took a 6-week paternity leave, which was kind of not like early days of people doing that. And he took that 6 weeks to launch himself as a science writer. I was like, what's a science? Who's ever heard of a science writer? But he saw in working for the museum a kind of niche for bridging science and essentially like what's readable language. So he's been a big inspiration to me in terms of how to describe it? Like, I think that in different ways, we've had a conversation about, you're responsible for your life. What are you going to do about it? So maybe in a kind of traditional sort of way, I've been more like the emotional end of that conversation, and he's been more of the practical end of that conversation. So Yeah, so it's really, I mean, like we read a lot of the same books about creativity, or I mean, for me, painting is very much, it's almost not about me being like being a painter so much as I really grew up in this completely chaotic family. And I really felt like if I'm not doing something that I really love, I am going to be a mess. Like I am going to be super unhealthy. Like we both had so much family trauma that we needed to deal with. And art, like in the broader sense, really was a pathway to healing for us individually, and kind of a, um, even though we do our work separately, there's sort of like a parallel aspect to it. I don't mean to paint this as like a super easy or warm fuzzy thing. It's not necessarily. Like there's aspects of that that are challenging. So like I'm trying to think of like, well, for instance, like editing one another's writing, you know, that's something that sometimes goes great and sometimes is a disaster. So it's, you know, that kind of thing. It's really, yeah, I feel like our relationship has been that it's almost like there's the healing inner, like healing story, and Jake and I both have our healing stories, and then there's the writing and the painting that is kind of like putting fuel in our tank in a way, you know. So because we needed to figure out ourselves in order to raise these kids differently than how we were raised. So art is almost more of a byproduct of that, as opposed to the other way around. I don't know if that makes sense.
That's a perfect segue to what I also wanted to ask, which is, what are the things that you do for yourself or as a family or supportive with your partner that really, like, what are the lifestyle things that you do to keep in that creative, true to yourself, productive mindset?
Well, yeah, again, this is sort of under the banner of like being sane in the world, because I think how like if you're a super sensitive person and you're completely overwhelmed by things in a way that's, I mean, you never know what other people's experience is, but I mean, things like, you know, we do a lot of hiking, and you know, one of us, like for instance, Jake took a course in dream analysis, and then I took the course with him, and then this led to a bazillion conversations with our kids about their dreams, and you know, like what's the, so I think that like I paint compulsively pretty much. Like I stop myself from painting because I'll wreck my work. I know for a lot of artists, there's a discussion that they might have with themselves of like, oh, I got to haul myself into the studio. That's not an, I have lots of issues, but that's just not one of them. So, yeah, so really it's more that the pace of my life, for me to feel whole in the world, really needs to be pretty slow. And being in the studio for 5 hours at a time, I just am able to drop into myself in a way that I really need. And if I don't do that, my experience of everything is just unhappy, chaotic. Like even going, like even if you said, do you want to go on a, you know, 6-week holiday, I'd be like, 2 weeks, because I just want to be back in the studio. It's sort of that mode of being is like kind of breathing for me. So,
And how are you finding your ideas of what to paint? How do you receive those messages of what you're going to paint next?
I honestly, Sabynthe, like if I had a new canvas every 5 minutes, it would be not a problem. Like, to me, I really, so I'll tell you a little bit about how, like, if I look at a, like, I have a kind of bank of images where I go, oh, there's something about this photo that really moves me. Sometimes it's other people's artwork, like how something's executed. And then I'll often bring together elements like the floor tile from, this like photograph, and the staircase from this photograph, and like, I end up putting something in there that I might not even realize till a year later. Oh, that's the red and white striped towel that was much sought after when I was a kid. Or that's like, I'm not even conscious of adding a kettle that just feels homey to me. And then I'm like, oh yeah, that's the kettle that we had at the cottage. So there's sort of, I guess I really think there's a lot, it's a lot of intersections between an aesthetic that I'm drawn to and an aesthetic that I'm wanting to develop in my work as well, because there are technical things that I'm always working on. So there's an imaginative piece, there's a things I've bumped into piece, there's where I want my work to like be headed this way. So yeah, it's sort of a mishmash of those things. And so I've never looked at a canvas and felt like, gee, gosh, I'm stuck. Like, not a minute of that. And where I do run into trouble, for those of you who are painters, because I think people run into trouble in different areas. I run into trouble from working too long on something. So I'm like, oh, good girls get their, like, for instance, working on commissions. So if I'm working on a commission and I'm like, I'm not solving this, the answer is not for me to just work harder. That is not the solution. The solution is for me to pack it up, walk away, pull it out. Like, even for me to say, oh, pull it out a week later, I'm like, oh, be honest, Rosemary, you can't pull it out a week later. And it's like, okay, well, wait like 2 days, don't work on it, So I'm sure for other professions, people have a similar experience. We have this idea that hard work is the answer. And the older I get, the more I go, no, I don't think that's the answer to any, I don't know what that's the answer to. Like, maybe I don't know. It doesn't make me more money, that's for sure. So.
Do you have any contemplative practice? See, it sounds like being in the studio is a contemplative practice.
Absolutely.
So do you have other contemplative practices outside of the studio that fill your soul for what happens in the studio?
Well, the rest of my life is just like really quite monastic, really. I mean, I do yoga, I walk, we do like a fair, like I'll be cycling or cross country skiing. So any of these things, again, it's not like, the opposite of this for me is I have no stress tolerance. So if I have like I remember I did a show in Toronto years ago, and like, it just about killed me, right? Like, I was just like, so for me, having like a really slow pace of life, having like very few things on my calendar that are like, that's, for some people love being busy, and like for me, I'm just not like that at all. I feel like when I'm busy, I'm not listening to people properly, I'm not enjoying my coffee, I'm just like motoring, and that's a space that's really where I'm very almost at odds with the culture. I think it's so common for other people to feel like, oh, I don't feel good if I'm not busy, and I feel like I really don't feel good if I'm busy. So it's a personal preference thing.
I can ask a question there, Rosemary, because that's something I struggle with. Like, I loved being not busy during COVID, but now I'm like completely immersed in that busyness. So how have you learned to maybe say no to certain family ritual. I don't know, whatever it is, like that busyness. How have you learned that?
Sorry, you're saying you do feel better not being busy?
I prefer, yeah, like, there's certain things obviously I love to do, but I really do love to just be like, I enjoyed that downtime that we had. And yeah, I've got crazy again. So.
Yeah, I really have come like pretty much full swing over to like, and as a parent, I mean, I don't know how old you are, Angela, but like, I sort of think for my generation, how I grew up was as much as you can take what you want and not feel it and not think it and just get it off the stage, the better girl you are. And now I'm like full over it. And it hasn't been an easy transition for me, but for me to go, actually, for me to write in my journal, my kids will benefit from that. Me saying no to that event that I know ahead of time, I've been to 20 of these, they're not meaningful for me. I no longer feel badly going, no, you don't even want me at that event. Like so that part of it, I feel like my muscle has really developed with that. And I mean, it's funny, I had a conversation with my daughter yesterday and she was doing something dutifully. And I'm like, don't buy into that. Like, you think you're helping someone else, you're not helping someone else. So more, yeah, but that's been a really slow, I mean, that's a result of like a lot of reading, a lot of not liking myself when I'm busy, so that's just a ton of like something that was quite powerful for me was learning nonviolent communication, which I don't really like the name, but essentially developing language around what's alive in you and figuring out how to make requests to the outside world that sort of jive more with your inner life. So I don't know if that's a good response to what
I also want to jump in, Rosemary. I remember when your kids were young and soccer was a really big part of the kids' lives in your town. It was a very big time commitment. And tell us about your decision to stop doing that, which is really along the theme of what you're talking about.
Yeah, probably I cried into the phone and yeah, well, because I when the kids were going to soccer, I mean, it's actually such a classic thing. You go and you take your folding chair and you sit down beside the other parents and you have a conversation. Like, and I'm always trying to move the conversation into a more meaningful place. And sometimes that totally works. And sometimes it backfires, like it makes people uncomfortable or whatever. And I mean, I don't remember the specifics of soccer, but I definitely remember that as my kids were growing older, that I would phone a friend who was older than me and go, do I have to hang out with people who like I don't even really enjoy because our kids are the same age? And, these types of questions where I didn't really want to, I wanted people to like me. So I didn't want to say, actually, like, I know all the good parents are there, but like, I'm dropping them off or whatever. So, and it's not, that's actually a classic thing because we think that we're being a good parent by being physically present. And for me, the meaningful time with my kids was not at the soccer match. The meaningful time with my kids was like the conversations that I would have with them about everything, like whether it's like going to the, so everyone has to find their own where.
I remember the day when you said, we're done, we're not doing it anymore. And in its place was these other more meaningful things that you were doing as a family. But it was a radical decision in the community to pull the kids out of soccer. That's what I remember.
Well, and if the kids are really super into it, great. Like, you're loving this, I totally will support it. I'll support my kids in anything that they are really enjoying. And yeah, I don't, but we have, I think as a culture, we have very shallow ideas about what it means to connect with your kids. Like connecting with your kids is, I mean, I spent a ton of time with my kids. I was very available at, like, when they, I could walk them to school. I could be around when they had friends over. I knew their friends' parents. So, and that's been a real benefit about being in a small town. But I think, yeah, like I think that one of the things that for me, I had to, that culturally there are these very conventional ideas about what it is to be good. And we don't think very creatively about, like, oh, was that actually meaningful? Like, because I find with a lot of kids, they might have very active parents with whom they don't actually have an intimate relationship. So yeah, and I think my painting practice was very much a foil to that mom headspace in which you are just interested. I'm interested in what's going on in your life. And it's not like a selflessness exactly. Like, and I would talk to the kids about, what was alive in me for sure. But somehow I was keeping a part of myself that really needed food in the studio. So
I have one more question for you, and then I'd like to open it up for anyone on the call that would just need to unmute themselves to ask a question of you. And then I'd like to go through the images that were rolling as people were arriving and have you speak to them.
great, super.
Is that a great way to round out the evening? So I know that, like, right after your university, you were a high school teacher, and then through all the career of being an artist in various ways, you've also taught it along the way. And so how has your teaching and mentoring evolved over that period?
Yeah, so on a meat and potatoes level, I went from teaching high school to teaching pottery to teaching painting for the city of Ottawa. Then I moved into teaching, like being an artist in the schools. And I think that process was like me trying to match my inner world with my outer world, right? Like I was like, okay, it's getting closer, till it came to the point where I was just like, you know what, I'll just run workshop. We have quite a big house. And so I started to run workshops, like painting workshops in my house, and they filled very quickly. And so that's something that just in terms of what it looks like from the outside. From the inside, I feel that I think that a lot of people come to painting. People really come to painting for different reasons, and my students have come to me. Some of them are like have real heartache, like very genuine heartache about not painting. Like it's painful for them, and maybe they have like a huge inner critic, or maybe they don't want to carve out that time for themselves because it feels selfish, but it's okay to be on Facebook. Like, so I think that the inner dialogue has become sort of part of my teaching, because what people's obstacles are artistically are often nothing to do with art. It's sort of like, oh, it's too self-indulgent, or I'm not good, or like other types of conversations. So yeah.
I want to invite everyone to, if they have a microphone and want to unmute themselves, to ask you any questions while we have you to ourselves.
Mhm.
And if you don't have a microphone, then you can type your question in the chat. And then we'll move on to some of your work.
Yay.
I do have a question.
Yes, Lisa.
So it sounds like meaningfulness is important to you, Rosemary. And I I just wondered, when you're painting, is it a meditative process for you, or are you focused more on the goal and the end product of what you're doing? And you mentioned earlier, inner critics can be a block to people, but I wondered if you have this sort of inner critic, you know, how usually artists are hardest on themselves, right? So I just wondered if you found that, have you found a balance between the two, or do you not think about the end product? You just get into a groove and enjoy the process and the meditation of the painting? I was just sort of hoping to get more a feel for how you work internally with your art.
So to be clear about where you're coming from, Lisa, are you a painter? Like,
I'm more a potter than a painter, but I'm a very debutante painter for sure.
But you're wanting to paint? Like, you are painting?
I've done some mixed media classes with a painter, an artist, and I want to get more into watercolors. I've done a little bit of dabbling, but there's a block there for sure. And I don't know if it's inner critic or what it is, but the kit's sitting right over there and I haven't picked it up in quite a while, you know? So I'm just curious. But
it's totally fine if you don't want to talk about this, but I'm like, because this is such a common experience, that when the kit's over there, like, is it something where you feel like, oh, I really want to paint, but no, I don't have enough time? Like, what's your inner conversation around that?
I want to do it. I see the kit over there and I don't do it. So it's just
like, does it bug you every day, or does it just like, it's like once a month you go, oh yeah, I forgot about that kit? Like,
no, it's calling to me, but there's something preventing me from making the effort. And that's like, so.
And when you make work, do you feel like, oh, I can't show this to people? Like, do you have that feeling?
Not so much. No, it's almost like I'm afraid to commit to it more than anything.
Totally get that. Yeah. So, yeah, like personally, I have, like, I feel like, okay, before I die, I really want to be able to paint, like, I mean, it used to be Lucian Freud, but it's like, it's funny because I just finished reading Catherine Mansfield's journals. I don't know if anybody, this is like published 100 years ago, but like, there's a real hunger in me. I'm like, I want to be able to do this. And like, it's like the desire for the skill. I do feel quite relaxed in a different way when I'm painting, but kind of like a jigsaw puzzle type relaxed, like where you're like, oh, okay, where does this go? So I feel like that's the same part of my brain that's problem solving. And I do listen to music when I'm working, and I don't, like, I would never listen to CBC or something like that while I was working. And yeah, like, I think that the extent to which people are really hungry to make something, like, there's kind of like, there's that layer, and then there's the layer of like, I don't like what I just made. Well, I don't like what I just made. Like, I've publicly put work out there that I feel like I am happy with that about 20%. Like, if I were giving that my own mark, I'd be happy with that. So I've spent a lot of time in that space of like this is the best I can do right now. This is a humbling experience,
Mhm.
but I want a piece of that maker pot. Like I want to live that, that problem solving mode more than my ego that's
Okay.
embarrassed. And
Mhm.
it's really funny actually, because my mom really took a lot of art classes and that kind of thing. And after she died, I found this drawing that she had done of my like little canvas shoes. I must have been 7 or something like that. And I thought, wow, my mother's certainty that everything she was making was garbage, really, it was like she had her foot on the gas, but more on the brake, you know? And I think, yeah, like kind of, I don't know, I wish for everybody that they could just go this, like kids in a sandbox, right? It's
Yeah.
like, you're not like, is this good? Like, you know, it's like, you know, we miss that part of ourselves. And for some
Yeah.
people, it's super painful. Like we really do miss that part of ourselves. So kind of,
Hmm.
I don't know, like
It's, well, you know what you said about music. When I was doing this class with Faye, it was like a very tiny class, but really meaningful for me. When she put on jazz music, something changed in my brain and I was like totally engaged, and the time, I didn't notice the time, or the technique wasn't so important, nothing. I was just, so it's definitely a left brain, right brain thing, I guess, but it was,
right? Like coming home to yourself, like that's
yeah,
how I want to live, right?
yeah, yeah.
And we don't even know that's a thing, right? Like it's like we're so, yeah, maybe that's that coming home to myself, because it's, I mean, that's my subject matter. Um, that's my daily habit. Maybe growing up in this fractured environment made that I want to come home to myself so much that everything else kind of dissipates a bit.
Lovely. Well, that's awesome. Thank you. Very helpful.
Any other questions before we, Angela gives me host powers again so that I may show the images, share my screen. And
You are still host, but I just actually wanted to make a comment. I have zero creativity in my body. But everything you've said has spoken to me like you can't believe. So I really want to say thank you, like, because it relates to, things that my passion for my work, my passion for my family. So thank you.
Well, I don't believe for a second. I don't think anybody's not creative. Like, I just don't believe in that. Because it's like this, it's like the sandbox thing, right? Like, it's like every kid is, they've got their little thing that they find fun. And I think I'm just kind of going, okay, what's fun? And writing for me is fun. Like I write a lot, I was saying, in my journals and that kind of thing. And it's not, yeah, I think the word creativity, and particularly like art and skill and all those things, really throw us off. And having a conversation with ourselves about like, okay, what's really fun? What gets me wagging my tail big time is, it's countercultural. Like it's really, it's kind of not okay somehow. This is something that we're reprimanded for. So you're a slacker or whatever, so, but meanwhile, we can become totally anemic. So that's sad. So I'm glad if it touches something in you. Yay.
Thank you.
Really quick question. What's your blog name?
So it's at my website, so rosemaryleach.com, and the blog is
Awesome. Thanks.
pleasure.
okay. I've turned off that auto progress, Rosemary, so that you can tell me when we're going to move on.
Okay.
Because I should be able to move it with my mouse.
Okay.
This is the image I chose to promote the event. Do tell.
This is actually a commission that I recently did for it's sort of funny that it's a big extended family, and Christine wanted me to paint her mom's cutlery, and so that is the Duncan cutlery set. It's I think something that's been really meaningful to her. So she wanted to have this beyond the cutlery set that doesn't get used much. So it's on her wall. So. Yeah, so that's a painting that is maybe 2 years old. So that gives you a sense of the scale there. And yeah, I cook a lot, and my studio is right next to the kitchen. So when I'm trying to clean my brain out so that I can see my work. So in terms of when I was talking before about hard work, often what I need to do is leave the room, and I need to leave the room and go start a soup. And then I walk back into the studio and I'm like, oh, obviously that's too orange, or that needs to be darker, or that needs to be lighter. And yeah, that's probably, I'm not sure what the original inspiration was exactly, but that sense of like, oh, I want to paint something that's really focused, and there's the butter, and then, oh, wouldn't it be fun if there were wallpaper behind it, kind of thing. Because I've been doing a lot of pattern recently. So yeah, so this painting, I don't know, maybe 6 years old or so. It's pretty big. It's like, that's like I think that might be 40 by 36. And yeah, there's a lot of, I think it was really inspired by a photograph that I saw. And I really like cozy spaces that sort of, when I was talking about kind of coming home to yourself, that I had a cottage, our family had a cottage on Georgian Bay growing up. It was very, very simple and out on an island, and Sabynthe had been there. And that, in terms of kind of coming home to yourself, I think a lot of my imagery relates to very simple spaces, because those were my coming home to myself moments, being at the cottage as a kid. That was my real home, not in Toronto. Yep, so the French press, I think this is my 3rd French press maybe. And oh, actually the person who purchased that bought it, I think, on the first day of COVID. It was, yeah, Nicole Guthrie. So yeah, pretty recent. Yep, this is a painting that was recently purchased by a woman in Denmark. So that's just arrived in Copenhagen. And a little bit riffing on a cafe that I hope will continue to live, but a cafe that Jake and I often hang out in on, I think it's on Laurier in Montreal. So it's sort of one of those slightly grunty, eclectic Montreal cafes, but it didn't have that tiled floor. The tiled floor is reminiscent of a cafe that I have a similar feeling about, of that same home feeling in Oaxaca in Mexico.
And I remember when you scooped your family up and went there for a creative break.
Yeah, so the creative break that we did 6 months in Guanajuato. Our kids had grown up. So Almont, where I live, is a town of 4,000. And I kept hoping that head office would phone us and say, oh, we're going to send you to another country. And like, it wasn't happening. So I had always felt that really strongly, people who I'd known who'd had a major overseas experience as a kid, they had, I felt, an important, I guess, like a kind of life-changing experience that made them view the world differently. And I really wanted that for my kids. I wanted my kids to be able to see the context that a lot of the things that we did were essentially choices, that they were, how we lived. So we made the decision to move to Guanajuato, which is in central Mexico. It's a really beautiful old city. We did 2 weeks of Spanish classes as a family. My kids did not speak any Spanish, so they were in grade 7 and grade 8. My son was hating me so much for making this decision. And then we threw them into this Mexican school where they, like, it was very sink or swim. It was not easy for them. But I remember when we were in language school, a grown-up said to him, "Well, you'll thank your parents one day." And yeah, it was formative, it was difficult, but it was hugely important to his life for a whole bunch of reasons that I won't go into, but in ways. So, and that's my studio. That painting's maybe 7 years old. So
I pulled a few images of you, just sprinkled them through.
Could I ask a question just now?
of course.
I'm as I'm looking at your paintings, I see the same style. It's like I'd look at a painting perhaps in a group and I'd go, oh, I wonder if Rosemary Leach did that, because they have a similar kind of feel in the colors and the way you the background and even the floor in this one, the chair. So it's like, this is, and I don't know if all your paintings are like this, but when I looked at your webpage, certainly a lot of them are like that. And what I'm wondering about is, it's like, is this your style? And was there a point that this became the kind of painter you were, the kinds of painting you did, or do, I mean? Or does it evolve? My paintings, I mean, I haven't been at it for very long, but they're just all look so different, and I don't have any style that I really know, or so I think that's enough that I've said.
Yeah, actually, it's really interesting because it's the same as Angela's comment about creativity. Your style's in there. Like, it's just, and it's really helpful to go to retrospectives of someone's work, because you go, oh, like, it's there, but you have to kind of see, when you look at anybody's early work, it's all over the map, but there's a thread woven through it that is yours. It is uniquely yours. Nobody else can fake that they're you. And you just haven't found that. It's not, and when I say find, it's not a conscious thing. Like, it's not, yeah, I think it's really helpful to look at, the lifetime's work of so-and-so and see their early work and to identify that thread, because it's there. It's absolutely there.
Okay, thank you.
Interesting.
In my honest opinion.
Interesting. And Faye, there's an early period of work that will be in the latter part of these slides.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is the period that my beloved clothesline came from.
This piece, yeah, that's okay. Oh, it's called Grandmother. So
These spoons?
Yeah, so that's the progression of, and you can see with that first image that I've painted over something. Not everything works out. Not all flowers come to bloom.
So my question is this a digital image that shows the progress of this piece?
Yeah.
Or is this a final painting that shows these 3 stages?
sorry, I took a photograph in the first 15 minutes, and then I took a photograph at half an hour, and then I took a photograph at like, I don't know, 6 weeks when it's done, and put them all together in one.
Okay. That answers my question. Yeah.
Again, recent image. This is an older piece, and I'm having trouble. I'm kind of wanting to say maybe 8 years ago. We picked blueberries as, like, when I was a kid, we would pick blueberries, and it was like something like, you know, you spend the whole day picking blueberries, and then the next day you make a blueberry pie. It was really an all, like, hugely consuming event. And so I kind of have there's something, you know, obviously picking blueberries is a very meditative experience. And I think my associations with blueberries are very like unhurried and yeah, utterly simple. So similar to the spoon painting, I'm just showing the different stages. And I think I was in Guanajuato when I painted that. I had a show at the end of my time there. And yeah, so there were I think I'd taken photographs at the market. And that's from that. This painting maybe 8 years ago. I've done a lot of sinks. You'll see, I think, some more sinks coming up.
This sink reminds me of the one in the Century home I grew up in.
Oh.
I don't know if you agree, Mom.
So I did a show about tools, and I love things that are heavy and utilitarian. And so, yeah, this, I just think it's a beautiful object. So I wanted to hang out with it. Yeah, this is quite a large piece. I think it's 60 inches wide. So these are, I've been doing a fair number of kind of larger than life images, and I'm actually just about to start a commission. I don't know if Diane's there. Diane Badger, is she there? Anyway, she's she walked the Camino, and I'm doing her footwear for that. So this painting, yeah, maybe 6 years ago, something like that.
That's interesting.
And yeah, I have a friend who had a real attachment to his old black briefcase, and so he asked me to do this.
Yeah, this wasn't in your original group, but I found it online. I just loved it. I wanted to include it.
And the wall in that, you can actually see the studio wall to the right of the door there is the same clapboard that was behind the black bag. So yeah.
If I'm going too fast, tell me.
No, that's fine.
Go back.
This is recently completed, and I think the title is Attain. And again, I've been working with patterns, and I saw an image not exactly like this, but similar to it. And yeah, it's I just was very drawn to that, I don't know, that concept. Yeah, maybe 6 years ago, I think. This is an interesting one for me. This is a painting that feels like it was done more recently, but was actually done maybe even 15 years ago. And it's an example of, you know, sometimes you do something well by accident, And I'm really proud of this painting, and Bill Berry, who owns it, just like knew right away that's the piece that he wanted. But yeah, there's aspects of this that I still aspire to, and it was done very quickly. So yeah, it's I have a warm feeling towards it.
Mm-hmm. And action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is, if you move to the next slide, I think you, oh, no, that's not it. Okay, so go back to the glass one. The glass one is, that's it's much larger than life. And that's a series that I've been doing on glass. And so that painting is 20 inches wide by 40 inches high. So it's, I don't know. Yeah, so that painting is called Poem, and it's, I sort of wanted to, I think that the time that we spend at sinks is actually quite meditative and interesting. So this is, I just love those old sinks. Yeah, that painting, oh.
That's an early work that I didn't put in, isn't it? Isn't that an early?
Yeah, so
early work?
I'm trying to remember if I did that. I want to say I did that in Mexico, and I'm not sure if I did it when we were in Puerto Escondido, or in which case, what, the kids would have been in grade 2, or whether that was in Guanajuato. I think it's Guanajuato, so that would mean that it was, oh gosh, I don't know, 2007 or something like that.
Yeah. I remember there was a period where there was so much water.
Yeah. So, yeah, I've done a lot of empty bowls, and I like the Buddhist concepts around empty bowls that, well, I guess for monastics, there's an element of, you walk around town with your empty bowl, and if someone puts rice in your bowl, that's, you're grateful for what you get. So there's something about that feels right to me. So
Blueberries.
Yeah, this is again a large piece. So it's well, maybe as tall as I am. When it's, so I'm trying to think, is that 50 inches high? Maybe that. Yeah, and I think that really speaks to a very solitary person. So yeah, it was sort of bringing together different components of my life, I suppose. The autobiographical aspect to it, and the Mexican tablecloth I very much associate with yeah, like a slow breakfast. So
okay, this is what I identified as that earlier period.
Right, so this was the when we yeah, I'm trying to think what year it would have been, but that's when we were in Guanajuato. So I'm drawing a blank, has to like 10 years ago, maybe a little less than 10 years ago. I had a wonderful studio. It was so amazing. And I actually don't sail anymore, but I did sail as a kid, and really, really loved it. And so I did a whole bunch of paintings that were, I think I did 7 or 8 paintings that were sailing paintings that were this composition playing with it. So yep, early sinks.
Even in the early days, sinks.
Very early days. Yeah, I couldn't even tell you when that was. But Yeah, it's funny because I relate all these things to like kind of my kids and how much freedom I would have had. So, at this point, I'm like, okay, well, I was exhibiting commercially when I did this, and it's a couple in Toronto, I think, who have this painting, and again, that it's that comfort piece of my cottage. So that's the railing that we had, and combining it with things that were completely not my cottage. So yeah, very much comfort items. I did a whole pile of kitchen counters. I could paint kitchen counters for the rest of my life. I find it totally fascinating.
Yeah, the still lifes that just appear in the moment.
They are there. You guys are going to get off your computer and go look at your kitchen counter. And wonderful. Hopefully it's messy. And this is based on a kitchen in a restaurant at Sleeping Giant, which is on Lake Superior. And yeah, just this wonderful utilitarian sink looking out. Yeah.
Your use of color is so different in this earlier period, and the wonky perspective. I just could drink it up. I just love. I have fond memories of all of these paintings.
Yeah. Well, it's I listen to a lot of and by the way, if anyone's interested in getting a list of resources from me, because I'm thinking and reading about creativity and listening to podcasts, I have a list of things that have been inspiring to me. And Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, she talks about essentially like the Stephen Kings who can produce, like who kind of have a template and who work with that throughout their lives, and then other people who are constantly reinventing the wheel. And it was comforting for me to hear that interview, because once I've figured something out, I'm not interested in it anymore. So this period, these are painted on black, like I gessoed it in black first. And it was like, once I knew how to do this particular type of art, I had my eye on something else that I wanted to be able to do. And so this just was it was sort of like behind me. It was like an old relationship that wasn't relevant anymore. So
the images that you still do, the stairs going into the window. You see, it's there in the red frame though. The stairs going into the window. An early seed of that, which was really developed more later.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the things that I've kind of honed in on one thing, because I want more. I feel like, oh, I don't know how to do this, and I really want to be able to figure out. So, painting glasses, for instance, like, it's something that takes. It's not like it's a long time, and you have to do a lot of bad glasses before you can do some good ones. And so these more involved compositions, they're really playful, but they weren't satisfying my need to be able to execute something with like it was, the playful part was getting checked off, but it wasn't meeting my needs for like, oh, I want to develop this skill. So yeah, so I think these sort of table settings, for one, it's funny because I think, oh, well, like on calendar years, I kind of go, oh, well, probably at this time in my life, I was actually probably being pretty social and was not tuned into how introverted I really, part of me was yearning to be. So that's a pretty introverted image. So. Yeah,
I think this is a wrap.
Can I ask another question?
Of course.
When you're doing such large pieces, is it difficult to make it uniform? Like I paint in watercolors, so it's different, but to keep this side of the painting the same as this side, and you've got so much territory to cover. Is that difficult to do?
Not for me. I think everyone just has different things that they find difficult. Like for me, working big feels easier because I feel like I kind of have this space. Like when I see paintings and I go, wow, that's amazing. And then I find out that it's like 16 by 20. And I'm like, how on earth would you do that? So yeah, I just have a feeling of spaciousness. I mean, watercolor, depending on how you're doing it, but watercolor is such a different process because it's got all this restraint involved, right? Like so for those of you who aren't painters, with watercolor, once you've killed your white, you can't get it back to where it was before. So it's really easy to overspeak. Whereas with acrylic, you go, I don't like that, and then you paint over it. So it's kind of like liquid paper that, as opposed to something that's just like you can't go back in time. So the processes are so different that way. And I stick with acrylics because I'm impatient and I don't have that careful brain of like, I do see things 6 steps ahead, but I don't, there's a restraint involved in that watercolor process that that doesn't suit my personality. You can't barf onto the page with watercolor and then take it back, so.
Thank you.
That's interesting.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Can I ask one more question?
Of course.
I really admired the glasses that you do, and I just wondered how long did it take you to get that down, because I can tell that would take so much, well, to a degree, just knowing the colors to choose, but also just they're remarkable.
There's in my resource list that I'm happy to share with you guys. I think I put it in there. There's a book called Art and Fear. And I always tell my students this story because I just think it's a great story. That a university professor, I think, had his art group, and he divides it into the quality group and the quantity group. And the quality group just have to do one really good painting, and the quantity group just have to produce a lot, like produce 10 paintings. They then take all this work and they mix them all up and throw the work in front of a jury. The jury consistently picked the quantity people's work, not the work of the quality people.
Wow.
And so to me, this was so liberating because it's like, well, I can control quantity. Like I can just make a lot, and hope. And sometimes it's a step backwards, but if you look at it as a whole and you go, well, I'm going to paint 15 paintings of glasses badly. And I'm not even going to, I'm just going to keep going and just hope that I like the 15th one more than I like the first one. And you have to allow yourself a ton of space for that because, 5 is not necessarily going to be better than 4. Like sometimes you're going to take a step backwards and you have to just go, okay, I'm still going to do 6, So I really think just
do it.
Practice. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosemary.
Thank you all for coming.
So much. This was just such a treat.
Thank you, Sabynthe, for making it happen. So yeah, that was really fun for me. And it's fun for me to, if I can save anybody an afternoon of crying on the couch, like one little thing that you sort of go, oh, there's space for that, then that makes me really happy. So Yeah.
I've put Rosemary's email in the chat. It's simple. It's rosemary@rosemaryleach.com. And so do shoot her an email. I'm personally in possession of these resources, and they're great. You'd love to have them. So
Yeah.
rosemary@rosemaryleach.com.
And may you all have your own time in the sandbox.
Yeah.
With or without COVID. So hopefully, I mean, well, hopefully not COVID.
Well, that was a really fun thing to do on a Friday night. Thank you both very much.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for
Thank you so
coming.
much. Thank you for the
Everybody.
generosity.
Thank you, Rosemary.
Thank you, Tanya, for sending this out to your list. I really appreciated that.
Oh, my pleasure. I would love to listen and speak with you more. So this was amazing. Yeah.
I did not say that lying in Shavasana is like a huge part of this. So
Yeah.
Take care, everybody.
Inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angela, for producing the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela.
Bye. Thanks, Rosemary.